A self-made bakery owner fights the billionaire developer buying her block, only to discover he is. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in that comments, along with the city you're watching from. And now, let's continue with the story. You have got to be kidding me. Nora Whitfield set down the mixing bowl and wiped her hands on her apron. The letter sat on the counter where Maggie had dropped it like a dead fish. White envelope. Typed address. Never a good sign. "Read it," Maggie said. She leaned against the doorframe of Whitfield's bakery, arms crossed, reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked hair. Nora picked up the envelope, tore it open with her thumb. The sourdough starter bubbled quietly on the shelf behind her, the same starter her mother had kept alive for 30 years. She unfolded the paper, read it standing. She was not the kind of woman who sat down for bad news. "Aldrich Development Group," she read aloud. "Pursuant to our acquisition of properties along Main Street and Harbor Street in Belmont, Maine, we are pleased to extend a purchase offer for your property located at—" "How much?" Maggie asked. Nora scanned the number. 340,000, Maggie whistled low. "That is twice what this building is worth." "That is what they think this building is worth." Nora set the letter down. Her thumb found the edge of the gold chain at her neck. Her mother's necklace. "This building is not for sale." Maggie picked up the letter and read it again. "They bought the laundromat last month. The bookshop the month before. 4 buildings on this block already. Nora." "Good for them. You are the last holdout." "Then I will be the last holdout." Nora turned back to her mixing bowl. Flour dust hung in the early morning light coming through the front window. The oven timer had 12 minutes left on the first batch of sourdough. She had been here since 4 in the morning. She would be here until 9 tonight, same as every other day for 12 years. Maggie watched her for a moment. "You know, most people would at least consider $340,000. Most people did not build this place with their bare hands." Nora poured water into the flour, measured by feel. She had not used a recipe in years. Aldrich Development Group. Sounds like a company that buys neighborhoods and turns them into parking lots. Maggie tilted her head. "You did not even blink at the number." "The number is irrelevant." Nora folded the dough once, pressed it flat with the heel of her hand. "This building is not a number. It is 12 years of my life." I looked them up. Maggie set the letter back on the counter. "Out of Portland, commercial real estate. They have been buying coastal properties from Kennebunkport to Camden. Wonderful. A corporation with a shopping habit. Their CEO is a man named Grant Aldrich." Nora's hands stopped moving in the dough, just for a second. Then she resumed kneading. "Aldrich," she said. "That name rings a bell." Nora did not answer right away. She pressed the dough flat, folded it, pressed again. The rhythm was automatic. Her brain was somewhere else entirely. "My mother worked for a company called Aldrich Maritime Industries," she said, "for 22 years. Maggie straightened. "Same family? I do not know." Nora shaped the dough into a round and set it in the proofing basket. "She started there when she was 26, before I was born. They fired her when I was 16. And then they let her go. They said, insubordination." Nora washed her hands in the industrial sink. The water was cold. She did not flinch. 22 years. And they reduced her to 1 word on a termination form. Maggie was quiet for a moment. In 32 years of running Chen's Hardware 3 doors down, she had learned when to push and when to wait. "What happened after?" she finally asked. "She worked odd jobs, cleaned houses. Her shoulder never healed right." Nora dried her hands on a towel. "She died when I was 22. My father lasted 2 more years after that." Nora set the towel on the counter, the same counter Diane had helped her install the summer before the diagnosis. 2 parents in 2 years. "Nora, do not." Nora held up a hand. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not, "I am not selling this building, not to Aldrich Development Group, not to anyone with that name." The oven timer went off. Nora pulled the first tray of sourdough loaves out with practiced hands. Golden crust, perfect rise. The smell filled the entire bakery. Maggie watched her set the tray on the cooling rack. "What are you going to do?" Nora looked at the letter one more time. Then she looked at the framed photograph on the wall behind the register. Her mother, Diane, standing in front of this very building the day Nora signed the lease. Diane's smile was wide. Her right shoulder was slightly lower than her left. It had been that way since the day they fired her. "I'm going to bake bread," Nora said, "and when Mr. Aldrich sends someone to negotiate, I'm going to tell them the same thing I tell every developer, every realtor, and every suit who walks through that door thinking this place has a price." Nora slid the next tray into the oven. "Get out of my bakery." Maggie laughed, short, sharp, the kind of laugh that said she believed every word. "I have owned my store for 32 years. Maggie said, pulling her reading glasses back down. "I do not need a billionaire to tell me what this block is worth. Neither do you." She headed for the door, paused. "But Nora, if it is the same Aldrich family, that is not just a real estate deal, that is personal." The bell above the door chimed as Maggie left. Nora stood alone in her bakery. The sourdough starter bubbled on the shelf. The photograph of her mother watched from the wall. She picked up the letter, read the name one more time. Aldrich Development Group. She read it twice, then a third time. Somewhere in the back of a box she had never fully unpacked, buried under her mother's handwritten recipes, there was a cassette tape she had never listened to. Diane had recorded it the year before she died. Nora had shoved the box into the closet and never opened it. She folded the letter in half and slid it into her apron pocket. "Not today," she said to no one. The oven timer started counting down again. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside Whitfield's bakery. Nora saw it through the front window while boxing up an order of cinnamon rolls for the elementary school down the street. The car was too clean for Belmont, too polished. A car that belonged in downtown Portland, not on a block where half the parking meters were broken. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dark coat over a tailored shirt, grey at the temples. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the bakery like he was appraising a property, which Nora supposed he was. The bell chimed as he pushed through the front door. He filled the doorway the way men with money do, without apology, as if every room adjusted to fit them. "Miss Whitfield." He extended his hand. "Grant Aldrich, I believe you received our letter." Nora did not take his hand. She set the box of cinnamon rolls on the counter and wiped her palms on her apron. "I received something. I would not call it a letter. More of a threat wrapped in corporate stationery." He lowered his hand. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, closer to interest. "I assure you, the offer is genuine." He glanced around the bakery, the glass display case, the chalkboard menu on the wall, the framed photograph behind the register. "I wanted to discuss it in person." "You wanted to see if charm works better than paper." Nora crossed her arms. "It does not." Grant Aldrich unbuttoned his coat and set his hands on the counter. His fingers were long, no wedding ring. A worn quarter sat in his palm. He turned it between his fingers without seeming to notice. "I'm prepared to offer you 200% of market value," he said. "Name your conditions. My condition is that you leave." "Miss Whitfield." "I am not finished." Nora stepped around the counter. She was close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive, something that did not belong in a bakery. "You have bought 4 buildings on this block. The laundromat, the bookshop, the insurance office, old Chen's second-hand furniture store that his widow was too heartbroken to keep running." Grant's jaw tightened. Those were willing sellers. Mrs. Chen was a grieving widow who did not know what her husband's store was worth. Nora held his gaze. Willing and informed are not the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. The quarter stopped turning between his fingers. I did not come here to argue. Then you came to the wrong bakery. Nora tilted her head. Tell me something. Does your company always send the CEO to handle a single holdout? Or did I earn the personal visit? You earned it. He said it without smiling, but the corner of his mouth moved. No one else on this block said no. No one else on this block has a reason to. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. You are not what I expected. I never am. Nora walked back behind the counter. She pulled a fresh sourdough loaf from the cooling rack and sliced it with a long knife, set a piece on a napkin and slid it across the counter toward him. Try that. He looked at the bread, then at her. It is not poisoned, she said. It is sourdough. The starter has been alive for 30 years. My mother kept it going before I did. Grant picked up the bread, took a bite. His expression changed. Something in his shoulders dropped, just slightly. That is remarkable, he said quietly. That is 12 years of 5 in the morning. Nora leaned against the back counter. That is what you are trying to buy. Not a building, not a property. 12 years of a woman who showed up every single day. He set the bread down. I understand that this is personal. You do not understand anything about this. Nora's voice did not rise. It dropped. Your last name is Aldrich. Yes. As in Aldrich Maritime Industries. The quarter stopped again. His hand closed around it. That was my father's company. Your father's company employed my mother for 22 years. Nora kept her voice level, the kind of level that takes effort. Diane Whitfield, does that name mean anything to you? Grant Aldrich stood very still. His eyes moved from the framed photograph on the wall to Nora's face and back again. The woman in the photograph. The woman in front of him. He stopped, started again. I will have to look into that. You do that. Nora picked up the box of cinnamon rolls. And while you are looking into it, tell your lawyers and your development group and your 200% of market value that this bakery is not for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. She set the box by the door. The delivery for the elementary school. The same delivery she had made every Tuesday for 8 years. Grant buttoned his coat. The quarter disappeared into his pocket. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. For what it is worth, he said, I did not know this building had history. Everything has history, Mr. Aldrich. The question is whether you pay attention to it. He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. I will be in town for a while, Miss Whitfield. We will talk again. We will not. He paused at the door, looked back. The sourdough is exceptional. I know. The bell chimed as he left. Nora stood behind the counter and watched his black sedan pull away from the curb. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was not. That stung. She turned to the photograph on the wall. Diane's crooked shoulder. Diane's wide smile. Aldrich, Nora said to the empty bakery. His name is Grant Aldrich. The sourdough starter on the shelf continued to bubble, the way it had for 30 years, the way it would keep going whether anyone noticed or not. Nora pulled out her phone, typed 2 words into the search bar. Grant Aldrich. The first result loaded, his photograph, his company. Aldrich Development Group, $300 million in coastal acquisitions over the past 3 years. And underneath the corporate biography, a single line that made her set the phone down. Son of Charles Aldrich, founder of Aldrich Maritime Industries, 1975 to 2016. The same Charles Aldrich who had signed her mother's termination letter. Nora closed the search, slid the phone into her apron pocket, pulled out the buyout letter, still folded in half from 3 days ago. She looked at it, then at the photograph. Then she tore the letter in half and dropped it in the trash. The following morning, Nora was pulling the second batch of sourdough from the oven when the bell chimed again. She did not look up. If you are from Aldrich Development, the answer is still no. My goodness! The voice was female, polished, a voice polished by finishing school and eager for everyone to notice. Do all your customers receive this welcome? Nora turned. A woman stood in the doorway, silver blonde hair, shoulder length, styled in a way that cost more than Nora's weekly flower order, fitted blazer, a string of pearls at her wrist. She carried herself the way old money carries itself, without effort, without apology, and with the quiet certainty that every room she entered belonged to her. I am Vera Aldrich. She extended a hand with manicured nails. Grant's mother. I hope I'm not interrupting. Nora set the oven mitts on the counter, took the woman's hand. It was dry and cool, the handshake of someone who controlled every physical interaction. Nora Whitfield, the woman whose bakery your son is trying to buy. You make it sound adversarial. Your son made it adversarial when he bought 4 buildings on my block without introducing himself first. Trying, Vera smiled. It did not reach her eyes. My son does not usually try, dear. He succeeds. There is a first time for everything, Mrs. Aldrich. Vera moved through the bakery the way a realtor moves through a listing, evaluating every surface, every corner, every crack in the ceiling. Her fingers trailed along the edge of the display case. She paused at the framed photograph behind the register. Is that your mother? Nora watched her carefully. Yes. She has kind eyes. Vera's gaze lingered on the photograph. Something passed across her face. Quick, controlled, then gone. What was her name? Diane Whitfield. Vera's hand moved to her pearl bracelet, adjusted it, a gesture so small it could mean nothing, or everything. Lovely name. Vera turned away from the photograph. I came to see what all the fuss was about. My son has spoken highly of your baking. Your son tried to buy my building yesterday. Speaking highly of my baking is not the same as respecting my answer. Grant respects very few things. Vera picked up a pastry from the display case, turned it over in her fingers, set it back. But he is persistent. That is the Aldrich way. The Aldrich way. Nora leaned against the counter. I am familiar with the Aldrich way, Mrs. Aldrich. Your husband's company employed my mother for 22 years. Vera went still. Not dramatically. Not the way someone freezes in a movie. The way someone goes still when they have been expecting a blow and it finally lands. Aldrich Maritime Industries, Nora continued. Administrative Department, Diane Whitfield. She started in 1980. They fired her in 2002. That was a long time ago, Vera said. Her voice had not changed, but her posture had, straighter, tighter. The pearl bracelet turned once under her fingers. 22 years of service, Nora said. They gave her a box and a 1-page termination letter. She carried that box to the car by herself. Nobody held the door. Vera's chin lifted. Companies make difficult decisions. It is not personal. It was personal to her. Nora's voice was steady, controlled. It was personal to me, and the 16 years she spent afterward, trying to recover from whatever happened in that building, those were personal too. I am sorry for your loss. Vera said it the way people say it when they have practiced the sentence. Smooth, automatic, like a reflex. I did not tell you she was dead. The bakery was quiet. The oven ticked as it cooled. Vera's hand stopped on the bracelet. I assumed, Vera said, given the photograph, the past tense. Fair enough, Nora crossed her arms, but you knew. The way you looked at that photograph, you knew the name before I said it. Vera picked up her purse from the counter. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. "Miss Whitfield, I came here to introduce myself, to see the bakery that has captured my son's attention, nothing more. And to see if I would be a problem. You said that." Vera smiled again, still cold. "Not me." She walked toward the door. Her heels clicked on the bakery floor, precise, measured, the sound of a woman who never ran from anything. She paused at the threshold. "I will give you one piece of advice, dear. Free of charge." She looked back over her shoulder. "Some things are better left in the past. Your mother knew that." The bell chimed. She was gone. Nora stood alone in the bakery. Her hands were clenched at her sides, not from anger, from something deeper, something that had been sitting in the back of her chest since she was 16 years old, watching her mother pack her desk into a cardboard box. The door opened again. Maggie, reading glasses on her forehead, toolbox in hand. "Was that who I think it was?" Maggie jerked her thumb toward the street where a silver car was pulling away. "Vera Aldrich, Grant's mother." Maggie set the toolbox down. "And how was that conversation?" "Informative." Nora wiped the counter where Vera's fingers had touched the display case. "She knew my mother's name, Maggie. She knew it before I said it." Maggie pulled off her reading glasses, folded them, set them on the counter, the way she always did when something mattered. "That is not a woman who came to see your bakery," Maggie said. "No, that is a woman who came to see how much you know." Nora looked at the photograph of her mother, Diane's crooked shoulder, Diane's wide smile, Diane, who had never once spoken badly about the Aldriches, not once in 16 years. "What did you know, Mom?" Nora said quietly. Maggie put a hand on Nora's shoulder, brief, firm, the way a friend of 12 years touches you when words are not enough. "Whatever it is," Maggie said, "you are not going to find it in this bakery, but you have got something that woman does not." "Which is what?" "You are not afraid of the answer." Nora looked at the pearl bracelet mark on the display case. Vera had touched the glass right above the sourdough loaves, right where Nora's mother used to stand when she visited. "No," Nora said, "but I know where to start looking." She picked up her phone, searched for one more name, Aldrich Maritime Industries, Workplace Records, 2002. The results loaded, and Nora began to read. That same evening, Grant Aldrich stood in the doorway of his father's study at the Aldrich estate on Cliff Road. The room had not been touched since Charles died. Mahogany desk, leather chair, shelves of maritime books and framed photographs of ships. The air smelled like old paper and something else. The ghost of cigars his father used to smoke on the balcony overlooking the harbor. Grant's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He had been ignoring Tom Fielding's calls for the past 2 hours. He crossed the room and sat in his father's chair. The leather creaked. The desk drawers were locked. They had always been locked. When his father was alive, Grant had never asked what was inside. After Charles died, the estate lawyer had handed Grant the keys and said, "Your father was a private man." Grant opened the first drawer. Tax returns, corporate filings, nothing unusual. The second drawer held insurance documents and property deeds. Normal. The third drawer was deeper than the others. At the back, behind a stack of old maritime charts, he found a folder, manila, sealed with tape, written across the front in his father's handwriting, "Whitfield, confidential." Grant sat back in the chair. The worn quarter appeared between his fingers, his father's quarter, the one Charles had carried since the day he founded the company. Grant turned it over once, twice. He broke the seal. Inside, a stack of documents. The first was a workplace incident report dated March 14th, 2002. Employee name, Diane Whitfield. Position, administrative assistant. Building 3. Nature of incident, fall from improperly secured shelving unit during inventory audit. Injuries sustained, fractured left clavicle, torn rotator cuff, Herniated disc at lumbar 4 and 5. Grant read the injuries twice. Clavicle, rotator cuff, lumbar. The second document was a memo from the company's legal counsel to Charles Aldrich, dated March 22, 2002. Subject, liability exposure, Whitfield incident. The memo stated that the shelving unit had been flagged for maintenance 6 months prior and that the work order had been delayed by the facility's manager. It recommended immediate settlement to avoid litigation. The third document was Charles Aldrich's response. One sentence, handwritten at the bottom of the memo. Terminate. Insubordination. No settlement. Grant set the paper down. His hands were flat on the desk. The quarter lay between them, motionless. The fourth document was the termination letter, standard corporate language. No mention of the injury, no mention of the shelving unit, no mention of the 6-month delayed work order. Just insubordination. The fifth document was a signed non-disclosure agreement, Diane Whitfield's signature at the bottom. The date was April 1st, 2002, 2 weeks after the injury. The agreement stated that in exchange for 3 months of severance pay, Diane Whitfield agreed not to disclose the circumstances of her departure or pursue legal action against Aldrich Maritime Industries. 3 months of severance. For a woman who had worked there for 22 years. For a woman whose shoulder would never heal right. For a woman who would spend the next 6 years cleaning houses with a fractured clavicle because she could not afford the surgery. Grant's phone buzzed again. This time he answered. "Where have you been?" Tom's voice was sharp. "I have been trying to reach you for 2 hours." "My father's study." Grant's voice was flat, the kind of flat that takes effort. "I found something." "Found what?" "A file, marked Whitfield, confidential." Grant picked up the quarter, put it down, picked it up again. "Tom, do you remember Nora Whitfield, the bakery owner, the one who told you to get out of her bakery, hard to forget? Her mother worked at Aldrich Maritime for 22 years. My father covered up a workplace injury that broke her shoulder and her back, then fired her for insubordination and made her sign a non-disclosure agreement for 3 months of severance." The line went silent. "Grant, my father did this." Grant stared at the termination letter. Charles Aldrich's handwriting, the same precise letters Grant had learned to imitate as a child. He hurt a woman, he covered it up, he fired her, and she spent the rest of her life in pain because of it. That was 22 years ago. It was today. Grant set the folder on the desk. "It was today, the moment Nora Whitfield told me her mother's name and I saw her face." Tom let out a long breath. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know." Grant stood, walked to the window. The harbor was dark. The lights of Belmont reflected off the water. Somewhere down there, on the corner of Maine and Harbor Street, a woman was closing her bakery for the night. A woman whose mother, his father, had destroyed. "I need a lawyer, Tom. Not a corporate lawyer. Someone who handles this." "This being what, exactly?" "I need to know what my father owed Diane Whitfield, and I need to figure out how to pay it. Grant, think about what you are saying. If this gets out, it should have gotten out 22 years ago." Grant turned from the window. The study felt different now, smaller, darker. "My father built this company on the back of a woman he discarded. I cannot undo that, but I am not going to pretend I did not find this file." He hung up, set the phone on the desk next to the folder. The study was quiet. The ghost of cigars, the creak of the leather chair, the portrait of Charles Aldrich on the wall, silver-haired and confident, the face of a man who had never doubted a single decision he made. Grant looked at the portrait, then at the folder, then at the quarter in his hand. He stopped turning it. Earlier that day, before the study, before the file, Grant had been sitting in the Belmont Community Church. Not for a service. The door had been open, and he had walked in to escape the cold. Pastor David Okafor had found him sitting in the last pew. Mr. Aldrich. The pastor had a calm voice, warm, the kind of voice that made silence comfortable. "Are you looking for something?" "I am not sure what I am looking for, Reverend." Most people who wander into a church on a Tuesday afternoon are looking for something they cannot buy. Pastor Okafor had sat down in the pew across the aisle. "This is a small town. Word travels. I know who you are and what your company is doing on Main Street. Then you know I am not the most popular person in Belmont. Popular and necessary are not the same thing." The pastor had folded his hands. "The question is, which one you are trying to be?" Grant had not answered. He had sat in the pew and listened to the quiet of the church, the creak of old wood, the light through stained glass. Now, standing in his father's study, with the folder in his hands, he understood what the pastor had been saying. Popular and necessary. His father had chosen popular, successful, powerful, and in the process he had destroyed a woman named Diane Whitfield and called it business. Grant put the folder in his briefcase, locked it, put the key in his pocket. He had work to do. 2 days after finding the file, Grant drove to Maggie Chen's hardware store. He did not go to the bakery. He was not ready for that. He needed to understand what had happened to Diane Whitfield after the termination, and Nora was not going to tell him anything he could use. Not yet. Not while she still looked at him like he was his father. The bell on Chen's hardware was mechanical, not electric. It gave a low clang when he pushed through the door. The store smelled like sawdust and metal fittings, pegboard walls lined with tools. A woman behind the counter with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses was marking prices on a box of lag bolts. Maggie Chen. He extended his hand. "Grant Aldrich." Maggie set down her marker, did not take his hand. "I know who you are. You are the man buying my block. I'm the man trying to understand my block." He lowered his hand. "I need to ask you about Diane Whitfield." Maggie's expression did not change. "That is Nora's mother." "I know. Then ask Nora." "Nora does not trust me." "Smart woman." Maggie picked up the marker again, went back to pricing. "I have owned this store for 32 years, Mr. Aldrich. I watched Diane walk this block every Saturday morning for a decade. I watched her shoulder get worse. I watched her sell the house. I watched her daughter come back from college and build a bakery from a folding table at the farmer's market." Grant pulled a stool from behind a display of paint cans and sat down. Maggie raised an eyebrow at the presumption. "I found a file in my father's study," he said. "Marked confidential. It contains a workplace incident report from 2002, an injury, a cover-up, a termination designed to avoid liability." Maggie stopped pricing, set the marker down again, looked at him over her reading glasses. "Your father injured Diane Whitfield, a shelving unit that should have been repaired 6 months earlier. It fell on her during an inventory audit. Fractured clavicle, torn rotator cuff, herniated disc." Grant's voice was steady, but his hands were not. He clasped them together on the counter. "My father's legal team recommended settlement. My father wrote one word on the memo: terminate." Maggie was quiet. The store hummed with the sound of a fluorescent light that needed replacing. "She never told anyone," Maggie said finally. "Not me, not the neighbors, not even Nora. She signed a non-disclosure agreement, 3 months of severance in exchange for silence. 3 months!" Maggie's voice went flat. "Maggie's. For 22 years of work and a shoulder that never healed." "Yes. And you are telling me this because I need to know what to do with it." Grant unclasped his hands, set them flat on the counter. "I have been using my company to invest in communities my father's business damaged, anonymously, through holding companies and renovation trusts. I have been doing this for 3 years." Maggie studied him. The kind of study that takes apart a person the way she would take apart a faulty circuit breaker, looking for the wire that does not belong. 3 years, she said, and you never told anyone. No, not even Nora. I did not know about Nora until last week. Maggie folded her arms. Let me tell you something about that girl, Mr. Aldrich. She has not taken a day off in 4 years. She does not accept help. She does not accept favors. She does not accept charity. And the reason for all of that is what your father did to her mother. I understand. You do not understand. Maggie leaned forward. She built that bakery to prove that nobody could take anything from her again. If you walk in there with a file and a guilty conscience and try to fix this with money, she will throw you out harder than she did the first time. Then how do I fix it? Maggie picked up her reading glasses, folded them, set them on the counter. You do not fix it, Mr. Aldrich. You tell the truth, and then you stand there and let her decide what to do with it. Grant sat with that for a moment. The fluorescent light buzzed. A customer opened the front door, saw 2 people in a conversation that clearly was not about hardware, and left. I am not ready to tell her yet, Grant said. I need to understand the full scope of what my father did, then understand it fast. Maggie picked up her marker. Because Nora is already looking. She searched Aldrich Maritime Industries the night your mother visited. She is smart, and she is angry, and she does not stop. Grant stood, buttoned his coat. The quarter appeared between his fingers again. His father's quarter, the one he could not seem to put down. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I did not do you a favor. Maggie looked at him over her reading glasses. I told you the truth. What you do with it is on you. Grant left the hardware store and walked the 3 blocks to the waterfront, Harbor Park. 2 benches, a flagpole, and a view of the bay. He sat on the bench closer to the water and called Tom. I need everything we have on Aldrich Maritime workplace claims, from 2000 to 2005, he said. Every incident, every settlement, every termination. Grant, this is going to take time. I do not have time. Grant looked down the street toward the bakery. The lights were still on. Nora was still inside, 5 in the morning to 9 at night, every single day. Nora Whitfield is already looking. If she finds the truth before I tell her, she will never believe I intended to make this right. And if you tell her now, before you have a plan, she will think I am trying to buy her silence. I know. Grant closed his hand around the quarter. Tom, I need you to trust me on this. I have trusted you for 20 years. It is the situation I do not trust. Fair enough. Grant hung up, sat on the bench. The wind off the bay was cold. The smell of salt and diesel from the fishing boats. Down the street, the bakery door opened. Nora stepped out. She carried a box, the elementary school delivery. She loaded it into her car, alone, the way she did everything. She did not see him watching. Grant looked at the quarter in his palm, his father's face in the worn metal, the man who had signed Diane Whitfield's termination letter with 1 word. He put the quarter in his pocket. He would not flip it again today. On Saturday afternoon, Nora found Grant Aldrich sitting on a bench at Harbor Park. She had not planned to walk that way. She had finished the afternoon baking and stepped out for air, which in Belmont meant walking toward the water. The bay was grey. The fishing boats rocked at their moorings. The wind carried salt and the faint diesel smell that meant the lobster boats had come in. He was sitting on the bench closest to the flagpole, elbows on his knees, staring at the water. No phone, no briefcase, just the worn quarter turning between his fingers. She could have walked past. She did not. Mr. Aldrich. She stood in front of the bench, arms crossed. If this is a coincidence, it is a convenient one. He looked up. His eyes were different than the day at the bakery. Darker. The confident posture was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, cracked, the way a wall looks the same until you see the fracture line running through the mortar. "It is not a coincidence," he said. "I was hoping you would walk by. That is either honest or creepy. Both, probably." He gestured to the bench. "Will you sit?" "No." She stayed standing. The wind pushed her hair across her face. She did not fix it. "What do you want, Mr. Aldrich?" He put the quarter in his pocket, clasped his hands together. "I want to talk about my father." "Your father is not a topic I chose." "No." He looked at the water. "My father is a topic that chose both of us." He paused. "I have been looking into the history between Aldrich Maritime and your mother." Nora's posture changed. Subtle. A straightening of the spine, the way someone braces for something they have been expecting. "And what did you find?" "I found that my father made mistakes." He said it carefully. The corporate language was there. Mistakes, not crimes, not cover-ups, not the one-word termination scrawled across a legal memo. Serious mistakes, ones that affected people who worked for him. "People," Nora's voice was flat. "You mean my mother?" "Yes." He met her eyes. "I mean Diane Whitfield." The wind came off the water, sharp and cold. Nora tucked her hands into her jacket pockets, her fingers curled into fists inside the fabric. "What kind of mistakes, Mr. Aldrich?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I am not ready to tell you everything yet. I need to be sure of the details first, but I wanted you to know that I am looking and that what I find, I will not hide it. You will not hide it." Nora tilted her head. The sharp enigma in full form, skeptical, unimpressed, reading him like he was a menu she had already decided not to order from. "A billionaire tells me he will not hide the truth about his own father. Forgive me if I do not rush to the window to check for flying pigs." Something happened to his face, not a smile, the ghost of one, the kind of expression that people make when they have been hit with something that is both unfair and completely accurate. "I deserve that," he said. "You deserve worse." Nora sat down on the bench. She left the full length of the seat between them. "But I will listen." For the first time since they met, the power between them was balanced, not tilted toward his money or her moral high ground. Just two people on a bench, looking at the water, carrying their parents' unfinished stories. "I'm trying to do the right thing," Grant said. "I just do not know what that is yet. That is the first honest thing you have said to me." "I know." They sat in silence. The lobster boats rocked. A gull landed on the flagpole and stared at them with the indifference of a creature that has seen everything the harbor has to offer. "Your bakery," Grant said. "How long did it take you?" "To build it." Nora looked at the water. 12 years. Started with a folding table at the Saturday farmers market. Sold sourdough and cinnamon rolls from a cooler. My first week, I made $47. And now? "And now I make bread." She shrugged. "That is the whole story." "I do not think it is." Nora glanced at him. Quick, assessing, then away. "No, it is not." She pulled her jacket tighter. "But the rest of the story is not yours to hear. Not yet." He nodded, accepted it, did not push. "I should go," Nora said. She stood from the bench. "I have dough proofing at the shop." "Miss Whitfield." She turned. "I am sorry." He said it simply. No qualifiers, no corporate hedging. "For whatever my father did, I am sorry." Nora studied his face. The grey at his temples, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands hung at his sides like he did not know what to do with them when he was not holding a quarter or signing a check. "Do not be sorry, Mr. Aldrich." She took a step back toward Main Street. "Be honest. Those are not the same thing." She walked away, did not look back. Her boots made clean sounds on the sidewalk, steady and even. The walk of a woman who never rushed for anyone. Grant watched her go. Then he pulled out his phone and called Tom. I need to tell her the whole truth. When? Soon. Before my mother finds out, I have the file. Grant, your mother? My mother already knows something. She visited the bakery 2 days after I did. She knows the name Whitfield. She knows more than she has told me. Grant stood from the bench. The wind off the bay was colder now. And Tom, if my mother gets to this before I do, she will not tell the truth. She will protect the family name. That is what she has always done. What do you want me to do? Get me the full workplace claims records and find out if Diane Whitfield filed anything, a complaint, a letter, anything that proves she tried to fight back. And if she did not, then my father's cover-up was even more complete than I thought. He hung up, walked back toward the estate. Halfway up Cliff Road, he saw his mother's silver car in the driveway. The light was on in the parlor. She was home. She was waiting, and somewhere in that house, his mother knew exactly what had happened to Diane Whitfield. Grant was certain of it now. The question was whether she would tell him the truth, or whether he would have to find it himself. The following Wednesday, Sophie Aldrich arrived in Belmont with a duffel bag, a laptop, and the particular directness of a 19-year-old who had opinions about everything. Grant met her at the front door of the estate. She dropped the duffel bag at his feet and looked him over. You look tired, Dad. I've been working. You always look tired when you have been working. Sophie walked past him into the foyer. She glanced around the house the way she always did, as if measuring how much of it she actually needed. Grandma called me twice this week. She wanted to make sure I was coming home for spring break. Your grandmother calls everyone twice a week. She called me about the bakery lady. Sophie turned. Who is the bakery lady? Grant set her bag inside the door. Her name is Nora Whitfield. She owns a bakery on Main Street. Grandma says she is difficult. Grandma says everyone is difficult who does not agree with her. Sophie smiled. It was her mother's smile, quick, sharp, gone before you could hold on to it. I want to meet her. That afternoon, Maggie Chen stood in the center of the Belmont Community Church Fellowship Hall with a clipboard, a roll of twine, and the expression of a woman who had organized events for 3 decades and still did not trust anyone else to hang a banner straight. The fundraiser is Saturday, Maggie announced, for the Block Preservation Fund. Every business owner on Main Street is contributing. Food, music, a silent auction. She looked at Nora. And the bakery is providing the baked goods. I am providing the baked goods for free, Maggie, as I have for every community event since 2012. I know. I am acknowledging it publicly so that certain people understand the difference between community investment and corporate charity. Maggie did not look at Grant, who was standing near the back of the hall. But everyone knew who she meant. Grant stepped forward. I would like to help. The room went quiet. 12 people, all business owners from Maine and Harbor Street, turned to look at the man whose company had bought half their block. Nora spoke first. Help how? However you need me. Set up tables, hang banners, carry boxes. He paused. I have 2 hands and a back that works. That is all I am offering. No money, Nora said. No money. Maggie looked at Nora. Nora looked at Grant. The room held its breath. Fine. Nora pointed to a stack of folding tables leaning against the wall. Start with those, and if you wrinkle that shirt, it is not my problem. Sophie, who had been watching from the doorway, walked in and picked up the other end of the first table. I am Sophie. She looked at Nora, his daughter. I figured. Nora helped them unfold the legs. You do not look like someone who does this often. I do not. Sophie set the table upright. But I know how to show up. Nora almost smiled. Almost. For the next 3 hours, the fellowship hall became a construction site. Maggie directed traffic with her clipboard. Nora organized the food stations. Grant and Sophie carried tables, hung banners, and strung lights across the rafters, while Nora watched from across the room with an expression that was half suspicion and half something she would not name. At one point, Grant climbed a step-ladder to hang a banner that read, "Belmont Together," and the ladder wobbled. Nora grabbed the base without being asked. "Steady," she said. "Thank you." "Do not thank me. If you fall, the paperwork is mine." Sophie laughed from across the room. Grant looked down at Nora. Their eyes met. Brief, direct. Something passed between them that neither acknowledged. Later, during a break, Sophie sat on a folding chair next to Nora and pulled out her phone. "Can I ask you something?" Nora poured water from a jug. "That depends on what it is." "My grandmother mentioned someone named Diane. She said the name like it meant something, but she would not explain." Sophie's eyes were sharp, clear, the Aldrich grey-blue, but without the guarded quality that Grant's carried. "Was that your mother?" Nora set the jug down, carefully. "Yes, Diane was my mother." "What happened to her?" "She worked for your grandfather's company for a long time." Nora looked at the banner across the hall, "Belmont Together." "And then she did not. Did they fire her?" "They let her go." Sophie watched her for a moment, the directness of someone who had not yet learned to cushion questions with politeness. "My dad has been acting strange since he got here. He goes into Grandpa's study every night. He locks the door." Nora said nothing, but her hand moved to the gold chain at her neck. "I think there is something in that study that has to do with your mother," Sophie said, "and I think my dad found it." Before Nora could respond, Grant walked over with a roll of tape. "Sophie, I need you to help with the auction display." "I was talking to Nora, and now you are helping with the auction display." Sophie stood, looked at Nora, looked at her father, back at Nora. "Nice meeting you, Nora." "Nice meeting you, Sophie." Sophie walked away. Grant watched her go, then turned to Nora. "She asks a lot of questions. She asks the right questions." Nora took the tape from his hand. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. "She asked about my mother." Grant's face changed. Not much, a tightening around the eyes. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." Nora tore off a piece of tape. "Which is more than you have told me." He did not answer. He stood there, holding the roll of twine Maggie had given him, looking at the woman who was 3 feet away and a lifetime apart. "I will tell you everything," he said. "I promise. Promises are cheap, Mr. Aldrich." "Grant." He said it quietly. "My name is Grant." Nora held his gaze. 1 second, 2, 3. "Grant," she said, testing the word. "Your daughter is waiting." He nodded, walked away. Nora watched him go, then turned back to the food station. Maggie appeared at her elbow. "You just called him Grant." "I noticed. Should I be concerned?" Nora arranged sourdough samples on a tray. "About the fundraiser, Maggie. Be concerned about the fundraiser." Maggie adjusted her reading glasses. "I have been organizing events for 30 years. The fundraiser will be fine." She paused. "It is the other thing I am watching." Nora did not ask what the other thing was. She already knew. Outside, the spring light was fading over the church steeple. Inside, the fellowship hall was coming together, tables set, banners hung, lights strung, a community pulling itself together against something bigger than any of them. And in the doorway, Sophie Aldrich was looking at old family photographs on her phone, scrolling through albums she had never bothered to examine before. She stopped on a photograph from 1998. A company picnic. Aldrich Maritime Industries, summer celebration. In the back row, half hidden by a taller man, stood a woman with auburn hair and a smile that did not match the stiffness in her shoulders. Sophie zoomed in. The woman's name tag was partially visible. De Witf. She saved the photograph and closed her phone. The fundraiser raised $11,400. Nora found out the number while locking up the bakery at 10:30 that night. Maggie had sent a text with the total and a single word. Wow, $11,400 from a town of 4,800 people. From neighbors who bought raffle tickets and bid on hand-painted birdhouses and ate sourdough samples until the trays were empty. It was not enough to fight a development company worth $300 million, but it was a start. Nora was wiping down the display case when the bell chimed. She looked up. Grant stood in the doorway. He had changed out of the fundraiser clothes, but still wore the tailored shirt, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. There was a streak of dried paint on his forearm from the banner work. He had not noticed. "We are closed," Nora said. "I know." He stepped inside. Let the door close behind him. "I saw the lights on. The lights are always on at 10:30. I close at 9. The next 3 hours are mine." 3 hours. He looked around the bakery, the warm light, the empty display case, the photograph of Diane on the wall. What do you do for 3 hours after close? Prep the morning dough, clean the ovens, balance the books. She folded the cloth and set it on the counter. The glamorous life of a small business owner. "Can I help?" Nora studied him, the paint on his arm, the way he stood just inside the door, not presuming to come further without invitation, the way he was not holding the quarter. "You can wipe the tables," she said. He took the cloth from the counter without a word. For 20 minutes, they worked in silence. Nora mixed the morning dough, flour, water, salt, starter. Grant wiped tables. The bakery was quiet, except for the rhythm of her hands in the dough and the soft sound of cloth on wood. "You are good at this," she said, "at wiping tables, at being quiet." She shaped the dough and set it in a proofing basket. "Most people with your money cannot stop talking about themselves for 5 minutes. I grew up in a house where talking meant losing." Grant set the cloth down, leaned against the last table. "My father spoke and everyone listened. My mother agreed. I learned to watch. That sounds lonely." It was. He said it without self-pity, just fact. "But it taught me to pay attention." "And what are you paying attention to now, Grant?" First time she used his first name without hesitation. She noticed him noticing. "I am paying attention to the way you touch that necklace when something matters." He pointed. Her hand was at the chain again. She dropped it. "And the way you work in this bakery, like it is the only thing keeping you upright." "It is the only thing keeping me upright." She washed her hands. "For 12 years, this place has been my answer to every question. What do you do when your mother dies? Bake bread. What do you do when your father dies 2 years later? Bake more bread. What do you do when a billionaire tries to buy your life out from under you? Bake bread. You are learning." He almost laughed. Not the controlled almost laugh from the first meeting. Something warmer, closer to real. "Tell me something about Diane," he said. "Something that is not about my father, something she would have wanted people to know." Nora leaned against the counter. The bakery was warm. The dough was proofing. The ovens were clean. For the first time since Grant had walked into her life, she did not feel like fighting. "She loved carrot cake," Nora said. "She made it every Sunday. Not from a box, from scratch, with fresh carrots she grated by hand, even after her shoulder stopped working right. She said the secret was cream cheese frosting with a little bit of lemon zest." Lemon zest. She said it cut the sweetness, made it honest. Nora looked at the photograph. She was like that. She believed everything should be a little bit honest, even dessert. Grant was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. "She sounds remarkable," he said. "She was." Nora pushed off from the counter, and she deserved better than what she got. The space between them had narrowed. Not because either of them had moved, because the air in the bakery had changed. Warmer, closer, the kind of closeness that happens when two people stop performing and start being. Grant reached toward her, not for the necklace, for a dusting of flour on her shoulder. His fingers brushed the fabric. She did not step back. "You have flour everywhere," he said. "That is what happens when you own a bakery." Her voice was lower than usual. "It gets into everything." His hand was still on her shoulder. She looked at it, looked at him. "Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. Type flour in the comments. Only those who made it this far will understand. Now let us continue with the story." Grant's phone buzzed in his pocket. He dropped his hand, pulled out the phone. "Read the screen." His face changed. Not a crack this time. A wall going up. "I need to go." He set the cloth on the counter, moved toward the door. "Grant." She said his name, and he stopped. "What is it?" "I received a message from my mother." He did not turn around. "She knows about the file." The warmth in the bakery cooled. The proofing dough sat in its basket, rising slowly, unaware that something had shifted in the room. "And there is something else," Grant said. He turned. His face was controlled, tight. "Tom just forwarded me a notice from the Belmont Department of Health. A routine inspection has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. We had an inspection 4 months ago. We passed with flying marks." "I know." Grant stood in the doorway. The night air came in behind him, cold and sharp. "Nora, I think my mother is behind this. I do not have proof yet. But the timing is not coincidental." Nora's hands went still on the counter. "If your mother sent an inspector to shut me down—" She did not finish the sentence. "I will find out." Grant stepped outside. "I promise." The bell chimed. He was gone. Nora stood alone in the bakery. The dough was proofing. The photograph of her mother watched from the wall. The oven timer sat at 0. She looked at the spot on the counter where Grant's hand had rested, where he had wiped tables without being asked, where he had listened without speaking. Then she looked at the flour on her shoulder where his fingers had touched. She did not brush it off. The inspector arrived at 8 in the morning. He wore a county badge and carried a clipboard and did not smile. Nora met him at the door. "Whitfield's Bakery passed inspection 4 months ago. We are not due for another review until September." Routine follow-up. He did not make eye contact. "Mind if I come in?" She minded. She stepped aside anyway. For 45 minutes, the inspector moved through the bakery with the precision of a man who had been told exactly where to look. He checked the walk-in cooler temperature. He examined the grout between the floor tiles. He tested the hot water pressure at the hand-washing station. He opened the sourdough starter container, sniffed it, wrote something on his clipboard. Nora followed him in silence. Her hands were in her apron pockets. Her jaw was set. When he finished, he handed her a yellow form, 3 violations. Violation 1. He pointed to the first item. Temperature fluctuation in the walk-in cooler. 0.3 degrees above threshold during the test period. 0.3 degrees, that is within the margin of instrument error. Violation 2. Grout erosion in the prep area floor. Potential bacterial harboring. That grout was inspected and approved 4 months ago. Nothing has changed. Violation 3. Cross-contamination risk. Flour storage proximity to allergen-free products. Nora read the form twice. Her hands shook, not from fear, from the kind of anger that starts in the stomach and works its way up. "These are not real violations," she said. 0.3 degrees, grout erosion, flour proximity. You know as well as I do that this would not close any bakery in the state of Maine. 3 violations in a single inspection requires a temporary closure pending remediation. He tore off the yellow copy and handed it to her. You have 14 business days to address the violations and schedule a follow-up inspection. 14 days. Nora held the yellow paper. I will lose 2 weeks of income, my regular customers, my school delivery contracts. I am sorry, Miss Whitfield. He said it without conviction and walked out the front door. Nora stood in the middle of her bakery, holding a piece of yellow paper that smelled like bureaucracy and tasted like something orchestrated. She called Maggie. The inspection failed me. 3 violations, all fabricated. How do you know they are fabricated? Because I run the cleanest bakery in the county, and 0.3 degrees is not a violation. It is a rounding error. Nora pressed her palm against the counter. Maggie, who on the City Health Board has a connection to the Aldrich family? Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then I will find out. By noon, Nora's bakery had a red notice taped to the front door. Temporarily closed. Health Department order. The sourdough starter sat in the dark, still bubbling, unaware that its home had been shut down. Neighbors came, one by one. The pharmacist from across the street brought sandwiches. The florist brought coffee. Maggie arrived with her toolbox, as if there was something she could fix with a wrench. I found the connection, Maggie said. She sat on a stool behind the counter and pulled out her reading glasses. The chair of the Belmont Health Advisory Board is a woman named Patricia Dunn. She and Vera Aldrich have served on the Portland Arts Foundation together for 11 years. Vera, Nora set down the sandwich she had not eaten. Grant warned me last night. He said his mother might be behind this, and you believed him. I believed he was worried. Nora looked at the red notice on the door. That is not the same as trusting him. That afternoon, the community responded, not with speeches or petitions, with food. The pharmacist from across the street set a bag of groceries on the bakery doorstep. For the woman who brought muffins to my wife's hospital room, he said through the glass. The florist left a handwritten card. 12 years of free birthday cakes for my daughter. This block does not forget. The elementary school cafeteria manager called to say the 3rd grade class had pooled their allowance money, $14.37. They wanted to help save the bakery. Maggie taped a sign to the hardware store window. Whitfield's will reopen. This block stands together. By 5 o'clock, 17 neighbors had stopped by. Some brought food. Some brought envelopes of cash that Nora refused. Some just stood on the sidewalk and looked at the red notice on the door and shook their heads. Nora sat in her closed bakery and listened to the phone ring with offers of support. She did not cry. She had not cried since her mother's funeral. But she pressed her palms against her eyes and sat in the dark for a long time. At 6 that evening, her phone buzzed. A message from Tom Fielding, Grant's colleague. Tom had been Grant's friend for 20 years, long enough to know that secrets built on good intentions still collapse. His message read, the fundraiser account was funded through Aldrich Development Group. Grant set it up 3 weeks before the event. He wanted you to have the money without knowing where it came from. Nora read the message twice. $11,400. The fundraiser that the community had celebrated. The money that neighbors had thought came from their own generosity. It came from Grant Aldrich. She called Maggie. The fundraiser money? It was his. Whose? Grant's. The $11,400. It came from Aldrich Development. Tom Fielding just told me. Maggie was silent. He funded our fundraiser, Maggie, our community fundraiser, the one we organized to fight his company. And he did it anonymously. Why would he do that? Nora set her phone on the counter, looked at the red notice on the door, looked at the photograph of her mother on the wall. Because he is either the most calculating man I have ever met, she said, or the most guilty. Nora, I need to think. Nora hung up. She sat in her dark bakery. The sourdough starter bubbled on its shelf. The red notice glowed faintly in the streetlight coming through the window. Grant Aldrich had funded their fight against his own company. His mother had shut down her bakery. His father had destroyed her mother. And somewhere in all of that, the man who had wiped her tables and listened to stories about carrot cake had touched her shoulder and she had not pulled away. Nora picked up the yellow violation form. Read it one more time. 0.3 degrees. Grout erosion. Flower proximity. She folded the form in half and put it in her apron pocket, next to the torn halves of the buyout letter she had never thrown away. 2 pieces of paper from 2 Aldriches. Neither of them told the whole truth. 2 days after the bakery closed, Nora walked into the Belmont Civic Center, where the Main Street Business Association held its monthly meeting. The room was full, 30 people. Shop owners, restaurant managers, the postal clerk, the librarian. Maggie sat in the front row with her clipboard. Pastor Okafor stood near the back, observing. Grant was there, standing against the far wall, arms at his sides, the quarter nowhere in sight. Tom Fielding stood beside him, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who wished he were anywhere else. Nora walked straight to Grant. The room went quiet. "Was it you?" She held up her phone. The screen showed Tom's message about the fundraiser funding. $11,400. Aldrich Development Group, anonymous donation to a community fundraiser organized to fight your company. Grant's face did not change. "Yes. You funded our resistance." Nora's voice carried across the room. Steady, controlled, every word placed like a brick. "You sat in that church hall and hung banners and wiped tables and smiled at my neighbors while your company's money paid for the entire event. That is not what happened. That is exactly what happened." Nora turned to the room. "The fundraiser that we celebrated, the money that we thought came from this community, it came from Aldrich Development Group." Murmurs. Maggie closed her clipboard. The pharmacist stood up from his chair. "Is this true?" the pharmacist asked. Grant stepped forward. "I funded the account, personally, not the company, and I did it because this community needed the money, not because I wanted something in return." "You wanted my bakery," Nora said, "and when I would not sell, your mother shut it down." "My mother's actions are not mine. Your money is." Nora held the phone up again. "You do not get to buy a community and call it generosity, Grant. That is not atonement. That is control." The word landed like a slap. Grant's jaw tightened. Tom put a hand on his arm. Grant shook it off. "I was trying to help," Grant said. His voice was quieter now, not commanding, not soft. The voice of a man standing in a room full of people who were deciding whether to trust him. "I did not know how to do it without being my father." "Then maybe you should have tried something your father never did." Nora crossed her arms. "Telling the truth." "I wanted to. I was not ready." "You were not ready." Nora turned to the room. "He was not ready. He had 3 weeks. He had the file about my mother. He had every chance to walk into this bakery and say, 'My father hurt your mother, and I want to make it right.' Instead, he sent anonymous money and hoped nobody would notice." The florist raised her hand from the second row. "What file about your mother?" Nora hesitated, looked at Grant. He stood very still. "His father's company injured my mother on the job 22 years ago," Nora said. "They covered it up and fired her. Grant found the documents. He has known for weeks." The room shifted, not toward anger, toward something colder, disappointment. The librarian spoke from the back. "Mr. Aldrich, is this true?" Grant's hands were at his sides. "It is true. I found the file. I should have told Nora directly. I chose instead to try to help indirectly, and that was wrong." "Wrong is a strong word," Tom said from beside him. "It is the right word." Grant looked at Nora. His eyes did not waver. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you would see my father when you looked at me. And I could not bear that. Sophie was standing in the doorway. She had arrived without anyone noticing. Her face was pale. "Dad!" Grant turned. "You are acting like Grandpa." Sophie's voice was clear, direct, the kind of directness that only a 19-year-old can deliver without flinching. "You are hiding behind money and calling it help. That is exactly what he did." The room was silent. Grant looked at his daughter, at the room full of people who had been his neighbors for 3 weeks, at Nora, who stood in front of him with the force of 12 years of proving she needed no one. He took a step back. Then another. Tom followed. "I will go," Grant said. Nobody stopped him. The door closed behind them. The room exhaled. Nora stood at the front of the meeting. Her hands were steady. Her voice did not crack. But there was something in her face that Maggie recognized. The particular kind of pain that comes from being right about someone you wanted to be wrong about. "The fundraiser money will be returned," Nora said. "We will raise what we need ourselves, the way we always have." The pharmacist raised his hand. "And the bakery. The bakery will reopen." Nora folded her arms. "When the inspection is resolved and the violations are cleared, Whitfield's will open its doors. This block has survived worse than an Aldrich." Applause, scattered at first, then stronger. Maggie stood. The pharmacist stood, one by one. The room rose. Nora did not smile. She nodded once, brief. Then she walked through the applause, out the side door, and into the parking lot. Maggie found her leaning against her car, looking at the sky. "That was hard," Maggie said. "That was necessary." "Was it the right call?" Nora turned her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Maggie chose her words carefully, "that man in there, he was not lying when he said he was trying to help. He was trying to help the way every Aldrich helps, with money, with anonymity, with the comfortable distance of a checkbook." Nora opened her car door. "My mother got 3 months of severance for 22 years of work. This community got $11,000 for pretending to be grateful. It is the same pattern, Maggie." "Is it?" Nora looked at her. "Yes." But as she drove home, alone in the dark, with the bakery key on the seat beside her, she replayed Sophie's face in the doorway, the way the girl had said, "You are acting like Grandpa," and the way Grant had not argued, had not defended himself, had not used his money or his power or his name. He had just left. That was not what his father would have done. Nora pulled into her driveway, sat in the car with the engine off. The gold chain at her neck caught the streetlight. "I'm right about this," she said to no one. The car was quiet. The night was quiet. Even the sourdough, sitting in the dark bakery 3 blocks away, was quiet. Nobody answered. 3 days after the meeting, Nora sat on the floor of her bakery at 11 at night. The lights were off. The ovens were cold. The red notice was still on the door. The sourdough starter bubbled in the dark, the only living thing in the room that did not know the bakery was closed. She had not baked in 72 hours, the longest she had gone without baking since she was 26 years old. Her back was against the base of the oven. The floor tile was cold through her jeans. She held a mug of tea that had gone lukewarm an hour ago. "I pushed him away," she said. To no one. To the bakery. To the photograph of her mother on the wall that she could not see in the dark but knew was there. He tried to help, and I stood in a room full of people, and I tore him apart. The bakery did not answer. The starter bubbled. "He deserved it." She set the mug down. "He hid behind money. He funded our fight without telling us. That is manipulation." The word sounded less certain in the dark than it had in the Civic Center. But Maggie was right. Nora pulled her knees to her chest. He was not lying. He looked at me and said he was afraid. Men like that do not say they are afraid unless they mean it. She sat in the dark for a long time. The streetlight outside the window cast a pale rectangle on the floor near the display case. At some point, she stood up, walked to the back of the bakery, to the closet behind the prep station where she kept supplies, old equipment, and one box she had never fully unpacked. Diane's box, the one Nora had moved from apartment to apartment, from the farmer's market tent to the first rented kitchen to this bakery. The box her mother had packed in the last year of her life, handwritten recipes on index cards, a wooden spoon with the handle worn smooth, a photograph of Nora at age 4 covered in flour, and at the bottom, underneath everything else, a cassette tape. Nora pulled out the tape, held it in both hands. The label was in Diane's handwriting. For Nora, when you are ready. She had not been ready at 22 when her mother died. She had not been ready at 24 when her father followed. She had not been ready at 26 when she signed the bakery lease. She had not been ready at 30 or 35 or 38. She was not ready now. She found the old cassette player in the supply closet, plugged it in. The power light glowed red in the dark bakery, a single point of light in a room full of shadows. She put the tape in, pressed play, click, hiss. The mechanical sound of magnetic tape beginning to turn. Then her mother's voice. Nora. Diane's voice was warm, tired. The voice of a woman who had spent 16 years carrying something too heavy to put down. I do not know when you will listen to this. I hope you are older than you think you need to be. Nora pressed her back against the prep station, slid down to the floor. Her mother's voice filled the bakery, the voice she had not heard in 16 years. I need to tell you about what happened at Aldrich Maritime, not the version I told everyone, the real version. A pause, the sound of Diane shifting in a chair. In March of 2002, I was doing an inventory audit in Building 3. A shelving unit fell. It had been flagged for repair 6 months before, but the work order was never completed. The unit landed on my left side, clavicle, shoulder, back. Nora's hand went to the gold chain at her neck. Her mother's necklace. Charles Aldrich's lawyers told me I had 2 choices: accept 3 months of severance and sign a non-disclosure agreement, or spend years in court against a company with more lawyers than I had years left to fight. I had a 16-year-old daughter. I had a mortgage. I chose the severance. Another pause, longer this time. I chose wrong, Nora. Not because the severance was not enough, because the silence was too heavy. The tape hissed. Nora did not move. But here is what I need you to hear. Diane's voice changed, stronger, clearer. I forgave Charles Aldrich, not for his sake, for mine. Carrying anger for 22 years would have been heavier than the injury. I decided that what he did to my body was his sin, but what I did with my life afterward was my choice. And I chose to give you everything I had left. Nora pressed her palms against her eyes. Nora, if you are listening to this, it means I am gone, and you are carrying something. Anger, grief, that stubborn independence that you got from your father and sharpened into armor. I know you, baby. I know you built walls so high that even the people who love you cannot see over them. The tape hissed. Do not let what happened to me be the reason you push people away. My story ended. Yours did not. And if someone ever stands in front of you with the truth and asks for a chance to make it right, listen. Even if their last name is the one you promised yourself you would never forgive. Click. The tape ended. Nora sat on the floor of her dark bakery. The cassette player's red light glowed. The starter bubbled on its shelf. The photograph of Diane watched from the wall. She pressed rewind, played the last sentence again. Even if their last name is the one you promised yourself you would never forgive. Again. Even if their last name. She stopped the tape, held it in her hands. Across town, in the study of the Aldrich estate, Grant sat at his father's desk with the Whitfield file open in front of him. The portrait of Charles watched from the wall, Grant had not spoken to Nora since the meeting. He had not spoken to his mother. He had not spoken to Tom. He had sat in this study for 3 days, reading the file, rereading it, looking for some detail that might change what it meant. There was no detail. His father had injured a woman, covered it up, fired her, and called it business. 3 years, Grant said to the portrait. I spent 3 years writing checks and renovating buildings and telling myself it was enough. It was never enough. It was never going to be enough. He closed the file, put the quarter on the desk, left it there. Then he picked up his phone and called Maggie Chen. Mrs. Chen, I need a community meeting at the church, and I need to speak. About what? Everything. Grant stood, walked to the window. The harbor lights reflected on the water. Somewhere down there in a dark bakery, a woman was listening to her mother's voice. I am done hiding, Mrs. Chen. It is time to tell the truth. The next morning, Nora called Maggie at 7. I listened to the tape. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Your mother's tape. She recorded it the year before she died. Nora sat at her kitchen table. The cassette tape was in front of her. The morning light fell across Diane's handwriting on the label. She told me everything. The injury, the cover-up, the non-disclosure agreement, all of it. And what else? She said she forgave Charles Aldrich. Nora turned the tape over in her hands. She said carrying anger would have been heavier than the injury. Maggie let that sit. The phone line hummed between them. Do you believe her? Maggie asked. I believe she meant it. Nora stood, walked to the window. The harbor was bright this morning. Clear sky, calm water, the kind of day Diane used to call a gift. But she also told me something else. She said, do not let what happened to me be the reason you push people away. Your mother always was the smartest woman on this block. She was. Nora pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Maggie, Grant called you last night. He did. He wants a community meeting. He wants to tell the truth, publicly, in front of everyone. Nora closed her eyes. What did you say? I said I would organize it. Maggie's voice was careful, measured, the way it got when something mattered too much for casual words. The church, Saturday, Pastor Okafor agreed to host. And you did not ask me first. I did not need to ask you first. This is not about you, Nora. It is about the truth, and the truth does not need your permission. Nora opened her eyes. The harbor glittered. A fishing boat was heading out through the channel, its wake spreading across the water in a white line. I know. Then come to the meeting. I will be there. She hung up, set the phone down next to the cassette tape. 2 objects from 2 different decades, both carrying the same message, tell the truth. That afternoon, Nora drove to the bakery. It was still closed. The red notice was still on the door, but the sourdough starter needed feeding, and a bakery does not stop needing attention just because the doors are shut. She let herself in with her key. The familiar smell, flour, yeast, the ghost of warm bread. The display case was empty. The ovens were cold. The photograph of Diane watched from the wall. Nora fed the starter, added flour, added water, stirred with the same wooden spoon that had been in Diane's box. The starter bubbled and doubled, alive, resilient, the way living things are when they are cared for even in the dark. While she worked, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Nora, this is Grant. Maggie gave me your number. I want you to know what I plan to say at the meeting on Saturday. You deserve to hear it first. I owe you that. She stared at the message. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She typed, "Say it to my face." 3 dots appeared. Then, Harbor Park, 5 o'clock. At 5, she was on the bench. He arrived 2 minutes later. No coat this time, just the tailored shirt and the grey at his temples and the absence of the quarter. His hands were empty. "Where is the quarter?" she asked. He sat down, left the same distance between them as last time. "I left it on my father's desk. I do not need it anymore." "Why not?" "Because I am done carrying things that belong to him." Nora studied his face. The lines around his eyes were deeper than a week ago. He looked like a man who had not slept well and had stopped pretending otherwise. "Tell me what you are going to say at the meeting," she said. "Everything." He clasped his hands together. "That my father covered up your mother's workplace injury, that his legal team recommended settlement and he chose termination instead, that my mother knew." He paused. "That my mother helped. Vera knew. Vera helped." Grant looked at the water. "I confronted her last night. She confirmed it. She said Charles gave her no choice. If she did not support the cover-up, he would leave her. So she helped orchestrate the firing and the non-disclosure agreement." Nora sat with that. The wind off the bay was gentle today, almost warm. "Your mother helped destroy mine." She said it without anger, just fact. "Yes. And you are going to say that publicly, in front of the whole town?" "Yes. Your family's reputation will not survive it." "My family's reputation was built on a lie." Grant turned to face her. "Nora, I have spent 3 years trying to fix what my father did by writing anonymous checks. Maggie was right. That is not atonement. That is avoidance. The only thing that fixes this is the truth, spoken out loud, in front of the people who were affected." Nora looked at the harbor. The fishing boat from that morning was coming back in, its hold full, its wake smaller now. "My mother left me a recording," she said, "on a cassette tape. I listened to it last night." Grant was quiet, waiting. "She told me everything your father did, and then she said she forgave him." Nora's voice was steady, barely. She said carrying anger would have been heavier than the injury. "Do you believe that?" "I did not used to." Nora pulled her jacket tighter. "But I have been carrying anger for 22 years, and it has not gotten lighter." They sat on the bench. The water was calm. The wind was gentle. Two people carrying their parents' unfinished stories, deciding what to do with the weight. "Saturday," Nora said. "Saturday." She stood, looked down at him. "Grant." "Yes. If you tell the truth on Saturday, all of it, with nothing held back." She paused, chose her next words the way she chose ingredients, deliberately, knowing the proportions mattered. "Then I will listen, and I will decide what comes next." He looked up at her. "That is all I'm asking. That is all you get." She walked back toward Main Street. Her boots made clean sounds on the sidewalk. Steady, measured. But this time, halfway to the bakery, she stopped. She looked back. He was still on the bench, watching the harbor, hands empty, shoulders straight. She turned and kept walking. The gold chain at her neck caught the last of the afternoon light, her mother's necklace, her mother's courage. Saturday morning, the Belmont Community Church. Maggie arrived at 8 with a box of folding chairs and the particular energy of a woman who had organized more events than she could count and still treated everyone like it mattered. 50 chairs, she said to Pastor Okafor, who was already setting up the podium. If more people come, they can stand. More people will come, the pastor said. He adjusted the microphone on the podium. When a man like Grant Aldrich says he wants to tell the truth, people listen, even the ones who do not want to hear it. Especially the ones who do not want to hear it. Maggie unfolded the first row of chairs. Have you spoken to him? I spoke to him yesterday. Pastor Okafor set a glass of water on the podium. He asked me what happens when you confess something that cannot be undone. I told him that confession does not undo. It begins. Maggie looked at him over her reading glasses. That is very pastoral of you. That is the job. he smiled. It was the kind of smile that had comforted 100 grieving families and married 100 couples. The question is not what he says. The question is what Nora does with it. At 10 o'clock, the church began to fill. The pharmacist arrived with his wife. The florist brought her daughter. The librarian brought a notebook. The elementary school cafeteria manager sat in the third row with a tissue already in her hand. Maggie counted heads, 62, more than the chairs she had set out. People stood along the walls. They leaned against the windowsills. They filled the doorway and spilled into the vestibule. Nora arrived at 10:15. She wore a clean blouse and her mother's necklace, and the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was not sure it was the right one. She sat in the second row. Maggie sat beside her. "How are you doing?" Maggie asked. "I am here." Nora clasped her hands in her lap. "That is all I can promise. That is enough." At 10:30, Grant walked in through the side door. He was alone. Tom was not with him. Vera was not with him. Sophie was not with him. He wore a plain shirt, no tie, no coat. His hands were empty, no quarter, no folder, no briefcase. He walked to the podium the way a man walks to something he has been avoiding for a long time. He stood behind the microphone, looked out at the room. 62 faces, his neighbors for the past month. The pharmacist who had handed him directions on his first day, the florist who had waved when he drove past, the woman in the second row who had told him to get out of her bakery. He cleared his throat. The room was silent. "My name is Grant Aldrich," he said. "I am the CEO of Aldrich Development Group. I have spent the past month in Belmont trying to acquire property on Main Street and Harbor Street. Most of you know that." He paused, set his hands on the podium. "What most of you do not know is why I came here, and what my family owes this community." The room shifted, not a sound, a feeling, the way a room changes when people lean forward without moving. My father was Charles Aldrich. He founded Aldrich Maritime Industries in 1975. That company employed hundreds of people in this area for decades. One of those people was a woman named Diane Whitfield. Nora's hands tightened in her lap. Maggie put a hand on her arm. Brief, steady. In March of 2002, Diane Whitfield was injured on the job. A shelving unit that had been flagged for maintenance 6 months earlier fell on her during an inventory audit. She sustained a fractured clavicle, a torn rotator cuff, and a herniated disc. Grant's voice was steady. His hands were not. He pressed them flat on the podium. My father's legal team recommended immediate settlement to avoid litigation. My father refused. He wrote one word on the legal memo: terminate. He had Diane Whitfield fired for insubordination. He had her sign a non-disclosure agreement for 3 months of severance pay. And he covered up the workplace injury that had caused her suffering. The room was absolutely still. Diane Whitfield spent the next 6 years working odd jobs with a shoulder that never healed properly. She could not afford the surgery she needed because she had lost her health insurance when she was terminated. She died in 2008, at the age of 54. Nora did not move. She sat with her hands in her lap and her mother's necklace at her throat, and she listened to a man say the words her mother had carried in silence for 6 years. "I found the documents 3 weeks ago," Grant continued, "in my father's study, sealed, confidential. I should have told Nora Whitfield immediately. Instead, I tried to help anonymously, funding a community fundraiser, investing in the block through my company. I told myself it was atonement." He looked at Nora, directly, without flinching. It was not atonement. It was cowardice. I was afraid that if I told the truth, this community would see my father when they looked at me. And I was afraid that Nora Whitfield would never forgive me for sharing his name. The room waited. "There is one more thing." Grant's voice dropped. "My mother, Vera Aldrich, was aware of the cover-up. She helped orchestrate Diane Whitfield's termination and the non-disclosure agreement, and I believe she was responsible for the recent health inspection that temporarily closed Whitfield's bakery. Murmurs. The pharmacist's wife covered her mouth. The florist shook her head. The librarian wrote something in her notebook. "I am not here to ask for forgiveness," Grant said. "I am here to tell the truth, 22 years too late. And I am here to offer something that is not charity and is not atonement. It is justice." He took a breath. Aldrich Development Group will transfer the 4 properties it purchased on Maine and Harbor Street back to this community at cost, below market value. I will personally fund the remediation of the health department violations at Whitfield's bakery, and I will make public all documents related to Diane Whitfield's termination so that her story is no longer covered by a non-disclosure agreement that should never have existed. The room was silent. Grant looked at Nora one more time. Diane Whitfield deserved better than what my family gave her. Her daughter deserves the truth. This community deserves the truth. I am sorry it took me this long to say it. He stepped back from the podium. The silence held for 3 seconds. 5, 7. Then Pastor Okafor stood. "Thank you, Mr. Aldrich." His voice was calm, warm, the anchor in a room full of people who did not know what to feel. "The floor is open." Every face in the room turned to the second row, to the woman with the gold necklace and the flower under her nails, and the mother who had died carrying a secret. Maggie squeezed Nora's arm. "Your move, girl." Nora sat still. She could hear the harbor bell through the church windows. She could hear the creak of the old wooden pews. She could hear, somewhere very far away and very close, her mother's voice on the tape. "Even if their last name is the one you promised yourself you would never forgive." She stood. Every person in the room watched Nora Whitfield stand. She did not walk to the podium. She stood where she was, in the second row, beside Maggie, with 62 faces turned toward her and the morning light falling through the church windows onto her mother's necklace. "My name is Nora Whitfield." Her voice carried, clear, controlled. The voice of a woman who had spent 12 years making herself heard over the sound of industrial mixers and morning traffic. "Diane Whitfield was my mother." The room held its breath. "I was 16 years old when my mother came home with a cardboard box and a 1-page termination letter. I watched her set the box on the kitchen table, and I watched her sit down, and I watched her cry for the first and only time in my life." Nora's hands were at her sides, steady. "She never told me what happened. She said it was insubordination. I believed her because I was 16, and I did not know that mothers lie to protect their children from the truth." Grant stood against the wall where he had retreated after his confession. He did not move. "My mother's shoulder never healed." Nora's voice did not waver. "She spent 6 years cleaning houses with a fractured clavicle because she could not afford the surgery. She died at 54. My father died 2 years later, and I built a bakery on the corner of Maine and Harbor Street because I needed to prove that nobody could take anything from me again." She paused. The church was so quiet that the harbor bell was audible through the walls. 3 days ago, I listened to a recording my mother made before she died. She told me the truth about what happened at Aldrich Maritime Industries. She told me about the injury, the cover-up, and the non-disclosure agreement. Nora touched the gold chain at her neck. One brief moment, then her hand returned to her side, and she told me that she forgave Charles Aldrich, not for his sake, for hers. Nora swallowed. She said that carrying anger would have been heavier than the injury. She was right. I have carried it for 22 years, and it has not gotten lighter. The cafeteria manager in the third row pressed the tissue to her eyes. The pharmacist's wife reached for her husband's hand. "I am not standing here because I forgive the Aldrich family. Nora said. "Forgiveness is not something you do in a church on a Saturday morning in front of 60 people. Forgiveness is something you earn over years, and it is too early for that." She turned to Grant. "But I am standing here because Mr. Aldrich did something today that his father never did. He told the truth. He did not send a lawyer. He did not send a check. He did not hide behind a holding company or an anonymous donation. He stood in front of this room and he said, 'My father hurt someone and I am responsible for making it right.'" Grant's jaw tightened. His eyes were bright. He did not look away. "2 weeks ago, I stood in a room and I accused this man of being exactly like his father." Nora's voice was steady, but the cost of steadiness was visible in the tension of her shoulders. "I was wrong. His father would never have stood where Grant is standing right now. His father would have sent a lawyer and doubled the offer and waited for me to disappear. Grant Aldrich chose to tell the truth, and that choice will cost him his family's reputation, his mother's standing, and the value of every property his company holds in this state." She turned back to the room. "So here is what I propose. I accept the transfer of the 4 properties back to this community at cost, not as charity, not as atonement, as justice owed to this block and to the memory of my mother, who spent 22 years in that company and deserved more than 3 months of severance and a piece of paper that told her to be silent." The pharmacist stood, then the florist, then the librarian. "I propose that the Belmont Main Street Business Association vote today on whether to accept Mr. Aldrich's offer," Nora continued. "And I propose that the terms include full public disclosure of the Aldrich Maritime Workplace records from 2000 to 2005, so that if there were other workers treated the way my mother was, their stories can be told." Pastor Okafor stepped to the podium. "We have a motion on the floor, all in favor of accepting the property transfer and the terms Miss Whitfield has outlined. Please raise your hand." Hands went up. The pharmacist, the florist, the librarian, the cafeteria manager through her tears, Maggie, with the kind of deliberate authority that 32 years on a block gives a person. One by one, every hand in the room rose. "The motion carries." Pastor Okafor looked at Nora, then at Grant. "Unanimously." Maggie leaned over to Nora. "Took you long enough." "I know." The room began to move. People stood. Conversation started. The pharmacist walked to Grant and shook his hand, the first person in Belmont to shake his hand since the day he arrived. The florist brought tissues to the cafeteria manager. The librarian wrote the vote result in her notebook. Nora walked through the crowd toward the side door. She needed air. She needed to be outside, under the sky, where the harbor bell was real and the wind was cold, and she could hear herself think. Grant intercepted her at the door. He did not touch her. He did not reach for her hand or her shoulder. He stood 2 feet away and looked at her the way you look at someone who has just given you something you did not know you were asking for. "Thank you," he said. "I did not do it for you." Nora met his eyes. "I did it for my mother, and for this block." "I know. But Grant." She hesitated. First time she had hesitated with him. "What you did in there, standing up without a lawyer, without a script, without your mother beside you, that took courage. It took 3 weeks longer than it should have. Most people never get there at all." She looked at the crowd through the open door. 62 people, talking, crying, hugging, deciding what to do with the truth. "We are not done." "I know. Your mother was not here today." "No. That is a conversation you still need to have." "I know that too." Nora stepped through the door. The spring air hit her face. The harbor was bright. The church steeple pointed at a cloudless sky. She stopped on the steps, looked back at him standing in the doorway. "Grant." "Yes?" "My mother's sourdough starter has been alive for 30 years. She pulled her jacket on. It survived everything the Aldrich family threw at this block. So did I, and so did this community. She walked down the church steps and into the spring light. Grant watched her go. Behind him, the room full of neighbors continued to decide the future of a block that had just been given back its truth. He put his hands in his pockets. The right pocket was empty. No quarter, no inheritance, nothing of his father's. For the first time in his life, his pockets held nothing but his own choices. Monday morning, the health department inspector returned to Whitfield's bakery. Different inspector this time. A woman, older. She walked through the bakery with the clipboard and the same checklist, but she moved differently, the way someone moves when they are actually looking, not performing. Nora followed her through the kitchen, the walk-in cooler, the prep station, the storage area. 20 minutes, thorough, professional. The inspector finished her notes and looked up. "Miss Whitfield, I reviewed the original violation report." She flipped the clipboard closed. The temperature reading was within the instrument's margin of error. The grout erosion was consistent with normal aging, not a hygiene risk. The flour storage arrangement meets all current standards, so the violations were not real. The violations were documented in a manner that I would call optimistically interpretive. The inspector tore the red notice from the front door. "Your bakery is cleared to reopen effective immediately. I have filed a formal review of the original inspection. A formal review. The original inspector has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." The inspector met Nora's eyes. "Someone on the advisory board flagged your bakery for accelerated review. That is not how the process works. I know exactly how it worked." Nora took the clearance form. "Thank you." The inspector left. Nora stood in the doorway of her bakery, holding a piece of paper that meant she could bake again. She turned on the ovens, pulled the sourdough starter from the shelf, fed it, waited for it to double. By noon, the smell of fresh bread reached the sidewalk. The pharmacist was the first to notice. He walked across the street and stood in the doorway. "Is that what I think it is?" "It is sourdough." Nora slid a tray of loaves onto the cooling rack. "First batch in 2 weeks. The line is going to be around the block. I hope so." He was right. By 3 o'clock, 27 customers had come through the door. Some bought bread, some bought coffee. Some just stood in the bakery and breathed in the smell and said welcome back. Maggie arrived at 4 with a bag of sandwiches and her reading glasses on her forehead. "The health board chair resigned this morning," Maggie said. She set the sandwiches on the counter. "Patricia Dunn, effective immediately. The newspaper is saying personal reasons. Personal reasons." Nora arranged sourdough samples on a tray. "That is a polite way to say she got caught. The newspaper will connect it to the Aldrich family by Wednesday." Maggie pulled a stool up to the counter. "Grant's confession at the church is already on 3 local news sites. Someone recorded it on their phone." "I know." Nora had seen the headlines. "Aldrich heir confesses family cover-up at Belmont Church. Bakery owner's mother was victim of corporate injury concealment. Unanimous community. Vote accepts property transfer." "How are you doing?" Maggie asked, the real question underneath the casual one. "I am baking bread," Nora said. "That is what I do. That is not what I asked." Nora set down the tray, leaned against the counter. For a moment, the armor slipped. Not the sharp enigma, not the woman who answered questions with questions, just Nora. 38 years old, tired, relieved, uncertain. "I stood up in that church and I accepted his offer in front of everyone," she said. "I reversed the accusation I made 2 weeks ago, in front of the same people who heard me tear him apart. That took courage. It cost me something." Nora's voice was quieter than usual. "I have spent 12 years being the woman who does not need anyone, who does not accept help, who does not bend." She looked at the photograph of Diane on the wall. My mother bent. She signed that non-disclosure agreement because she had a 16-year-old daughter and a mortgage. I judged her for that for 22 years. And now? Now I understand that bending is not the same as breaking. Nora straightened. She bent so I could stand, and I spent 12 years standing so hard that I forgot why she bent in the first place. Maggie removed her reading glasses, folded them, set them on the counter, the gesture she always made when something mattered too much for casual handling. Your mother would be proud of you, Maggie said. My mother would say I took too long. That too, Maggie smiled, but she would be proud. The bell chimed. Tom Fielding walked in. He looked uncomfortable in the bakery, a man built for corporate offices, standing among sourdough loaves and wooden cutting boards. Miss Whitfield. He set a folder on the counter. Grant asked me to deliver the property transfer documents. 4 buildings, Maine and Harbor Street, transfer at cost, as he promised. Nora opened the folder. Legal documents, transfer agreements, property deeds, everything Grant had committed to at the church meeting. These are real, she said. They are real. Tom clasped his hands in front of him. Grant is also setting up a remediation fund for any former Aldrich Maritime employees who can demonstrate workplace injury claims from 2000 to 2005. The fund will be managed independently. No Aldrich family involvement in the disbursement. Nora looked at the documents, then at Tom. Where is Grant? At the estate. Tom shifted his weight. His mother came back from Portland this morning. They are having a conversation. Having a conversation. Nora closed the folder. Is that the corporate way of saying they are fighting? It is the corporate way of saying I was asked to leave the room. Tom moved toward the door. Miss Whitfield, for what it is worth, I have known Grant for 20 years. I have never seen him do anything like what he did on Saturday. He is not his father. He never was. I know. Nora set the folder beside the register. Tell him the bakery is open. If he wants coffee, he knows where to find it. Tom left. Maggie raised an eyebrow. You just invited a billionaire for coffee. I invited a man who told the truth for coffee. Nora pulled a fresh tray from the oven. There is a difference. Maggie picked up one of the sandwiches she had brought, took a bite, chewed. I have owned this store for 32 years, Maggie said. I have seen this block survive a recession, 2 hurricanes, and a developer who wanted to turn Main Street into a strip mall, but I have never seen what I saw on Saturday. A billionaire crying in a church. A woman accepting help without it costing her who she is. Maggie finished her sandwich. That was you, Nora. That was the bravest thing this block has ever seen. Nora did not answer. She arranged the loaves on the cooling rack and wiped the counter and set out the samples for the afternoon customers. But when Maggie left and the bakery was quiet, she stood in front of Diane's photograph and pressed her thumb against the gold chain at her neck. I listened, Mum, she whispered. I finally listened. The sourdough starter bubbled on its shelf, alive, 30 years and counting. That evening, Grant drove to the Aldrich estate on Cliff Road. His mother's silver car was in the driveway. The parlor light was on. The rest of the house was dark. He let himself in. Walked through the foyer to the parlor. Vera was sitting in the high-backed chair by the window, the one that faced the harbor. She wore a cream blouse and her pearl bracelet. A glass of water sat untouched on the side table. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically. Something else. The commanding presence that had filled every room she entered for as long as Grant could remember. It was still there, but the edges had worn down, like a coin handled too many times. Mother. Grant. She did not stand. I watched the video from the church. Patricia Dunn forwarded it to me this morning before she resigned. I know. You name me. Vera's voice was level, controlled. The kind of control that had been perfected over decades of social functions and charity galas and uncomfortable conversations at dinner parties. In front of 60 people and a camera phone, you told them I helped cover up what your father did. Because you did. Because I had no choice. Grant pulled a chair across from her, sat down. The parlor was quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked. The harbor lights reflected off the ceiling through the window. "Tell me," he said. Vera looked at the water glass, did not pick it up. "Your father came home from the office the night of the incident." Her voice was precise, each word placed like a chess piece. "March 14th, 2002. He was angry, not the kind of angry he showed the board or the lawyers, the private kind. The kind that meant someone had threatened his control. Diane Whitfield, a shelving unit in Building 3. Vera's fingers moved to the pearl bracelet, adjusted it. "He told me a woman had been injured. He told me the legal team wanted to settle. He told me that if the settlement went through, the Maritime Safety Board would investigate, and the investigation would reveal maintenance failures going back 2 years, failures he had been warned about. Failures he had ignored to keep the quarterly numbers strong." Grant sat very still. He knew the shelving was dangerous. He knew everything. Vera's chin lifted. The old defiance. The armor. "And he told me that if I did not help him manage the situation, he would leave, he would take the company, the house, the accounts, and he would leave me with nothing." Sophie's voice came from the doorway. "Grandma!" Both of them turned. Sophie stood at the threshold, still wearing her coat. She had let herself in through the kitchen door. "How long have you been there?" Grant asked. "Long enough." Sophie walked in, sat on the arm of the sofa between them. Her eyes were on Vera. "You were trapped." Vera's composure cracked. Not a break, a hairline fracture that ran from her eyes to her mouth. Her hand stopped on the pearl bracelet. "I was 33 years old when I married your grandfather." Her voice was quieter now, stripped of the social polish. "I had no career, no income of my own, no family nearby. He was everything I had, and he knew it. When he told me to help him manage the Whitfield situation, I did not have the courage to say no." "But you had the courage to help fire an injured woman," Grant said. "I had the survival instinct of a woman who had nowhere else to go." Vera's eyes met his. For the first time, Grant saw something he had never seen in his mother. Not guilt, exactly. Reckoning. The face of a woman who had spent 22 years building a wall around a decision she could not undo. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Grant. I'm telling you what happened." Sophie reached across the sofa and put her hand on Vera's arm. Vera looked at the hand. Her own hand trembled. "I drafted the non-disclosure agreement language," Vera said. "Not the lawyers. Me. I knew what to include because I understood what Diane would fear most. A long court battle she could not afford with a child at home. I exploited that." Her voice caught, just barely. "I'm not a good person, Grant. But I was not given good choices." "Everyone is given choices, Mother." "Easy to say when you have $300 million and a Princeton education." Vera's chin lifted again. The last defiance of a woman who was losing the one thing she had always controlled, the story. "I had a high school diploma and a husband who owned everything, including me. Do not lecture me about choices." The room was quiet. The clock ticked. The harbor lights shifted on the ceiling. Sophie spoke. "Grandma, did you feel bad about it?" "Every day." Vera did not hesitate. "Every single day for 22 years. I drove past the women's shelter fundraiser every November, and I donated more than anyone, and I told myself it was penance. It was not. It was the cost of living with what I did." She reached for the pearl bracelet, the one Charles had given her on their 10th anniversary, the one she had not removed in 25 years. She unclasped it, Set it on the side table next to the untouched water glass. That was his. She looked at the pearls. Everything I wore, everything I owned, everything I was, his. I am done wearing what he gave me. Grant looked at the bracelet on the table, then at his mother, the woman who had raised him, the woman who had helped destroy Diane Whitfield, the woman who had spent 22 years locked inside a decision she could not change. I am not going to protect you from what comes next, he said. The documents will be made public. The health board investigation will name you. The community will know. I know. But I'm not going to abandon you either. He said it quietly. The commanding voice was gone, just his voice. That is what my father would have done. Vera's eyes filled. She did not cry. She had not cried since 1989, the year Charles missed their anniversary for a business trip, and she decided that tears were something she could not afford. But her eyes filled, and she did not look away. Sophie squeezed her grandmother's arm. I understand now, Grandma. I do not agree with what you did, but I understand why. Vera put her hand over Sophie's. The trembling had stopped. Your grandfather would have hated today, Vera said. A room full of people hearing the truth about him. Good, Sophie said. Grant stood, walked to the window. The harbour was dark. The lights of Main Street were visible in the distance. The bakery, the hardware store, the church steeple. Nora Whitfield invited me for coffee, he said. Vera looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Not jealousy, not disapproval, recognition. Go, Vera said. And Grant, tell her I am sorry, not the practiced kind. The real kind. Grant looked at his mother one more time. The woman without the bracelet, the woman without the armor. Tell her yourself, he said. He walked out of the parlor, through the foyer, out the front door, into the night. The following Saturday, Whitfield's bakery held its grand reopening. Maggie had insisted on the word grand. Nora had resisted. It is a bakery, Maggie, not a gala. It is the bakery that survived the Aldrich family. Maggie hung a hand-painted banner across the front window. Whitfield's bakery, open and here to stay. That is grand enough for me. By 9 in the morning, the line reached the corner of Maine and Harbor Street. 40 people, then 50. The pharmacist and his wife were first. The florist brought daisies for the counter. The elementary school cafeteria manager arrived with the third-grade class, who presented Nora with a handmade card that read, We love your bread, Miss Nora. Nora took the card, held it, read it twice, set it on the shelf next to the sourdough starter. Pastor Okafor arrived with his wife and stood near the back, observing the crowd with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen his community do something it would remember. How does it feel? He asked Nora when she brought him a coffee. Crowded. She looked at the line that now extended past the hardware store. I have never had this many people in this bakery at one time. They are not here for the bread, Nora. I know. She set the coffee on his table, but the bread helps. Grant arrived at 10. He came through the front door like everyone else. No sedan, no tailored coat. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and looked like a man who had not slept well, but had made peace with it. Nora was behind the counter, boxing up orders. She looked up when the bell chimed. You came. You invited me. He stood at the counter. Coffee, please. She poured it, set it in front of him. Their fingers did not touch this time. The counter was between them, the way it had been the first day he walked in. But the counter felt different now, not a barrier. A shared surface. How is your mother? Nora asked. She is processing. Grant wrapped his hands around the cup. She took off the pearl bracelet, the one my father gave her. She has not worn it since Tuesday. That is something. It is everything. He took a sip of coffee. She wants to come see you. Nora's hands paused on the bread knife. Vera Aldrich wants to come to my bakery. She wants to apologize. Not the practiced kind. There's only one kind that matters. Nora resumed slicing. She can come when she's ready. At noon, Maggie stood on a chair in the middle of the bakery and clinked a spoon against a coffee mug. "I want to say something," Maggie announced. The room quieted. "I have owned Chen's Hardware for 32 years. I have seen this block through a lot, but I have never seen what I have seen in the past month." She looked around the room. The pharmacist, the florist, the librarian, the cafeteria manager, Pastor Okafor, Sophie, who sat at a corner table with a plate of cinnamon rolls, Grant, standing near the register, Nora, behind the counter. "This block was built by people who show up," Maggie said. "People who open their doors at 5 in the morning and close them at 9 at night and do it again the next day. Diane Whitfield was one of those people. She walked this block every Saturday morning for 10 years. She bought nails from my store and bread from the old bakery that used to be here, and she waved at everyone she passed." Nora pressed her lips together. Her hand found the necklace. "Her daughter built this bakery from nothing." Maggie's voice was steady and warm. "And when someone tried to take it from her, this block stood up. Not because we are brave, because we are neighbors. And neighbors do not let neighbors fall." Applause, warm and full, the kind that comes from a room of people who mean it. Maggie stepped down from the chair, walked to Nora, hugged her, brief, firm. The hug of a woman who had been a neighbor for 12 years and a friend for longer than that. "Your mother would be proud," Maggie said quietly. "You already said that. It bears repeating." The afternoon passed in a blur of sourdough and cinnamon rolls and coffee and conversations. Grant helped behind the counter for 2 hours, boxing orders and washing dishes without being asked. Sophie charmed the third-grade class into singing a song about bread that they appeared to have made up on the spot. At 4 o'clock, when the crowd had thinned to a few regulars, the bell chimed one more time. Vera Aldrich stood in the doorway. She was smaller than she had been the first time she visited the bakery 3 weeks ago. Not physically. Something else. The blazer was gone. She wore a simple sweater. No pearl bracelet. Her hands were at her sides, unadorned. The bakery went quiet. Maggie set down her coffee. The pharmacist paused mid-bite. Vera walked to the counter, stood in front of Nora. The two women looked at each other across the glass display case, the surface where Vera had run her fingers the first time, and Nora had wiped away the mark. "One coffee, please." Vera's voice was quiet. No polish. No performance. "Black." Nora poured the coffee, set it on the counter. Vera picked it up, held it in both hands. "Miss Whitfield." She met Nora's eyes. "I am sorry for what I did to your mother. I am sorry for what I did to your bakery. And I am sorry it took my son's courage to bring me here." Nora studied her face, the lines, the weariness, the absence of the bracelet, the trembling hands that were steady now, wrapped around a paper cup of coffee from the bakery she had tried to destroy. "Drink your coffee, Mrs. Aldrich." Nora's voice was level, neither cold nor warm, the voice of a woman who was not ready to forgive, but was willing to let someone sit in her bakery while she decided. "It is on the house." Vera nodded. Once, took her coffee to a table by the window, sat down, drank it slowly. Nobody spoke about it. Nobody needed to. Grant stood near the register and watched his mother sit in the bakery of the woman she had wronged. He watched Nora serve customers and slice bread and wipe the counter with the same deliberate motion she had used every day for 12 years. Sophie appeared beside him. "Dad." "Yes." "I think Grandma is going to be okay." "I think so too." Grant looked at his daughter, at the woman behind the counter, at the photograph on the wall, at the room full of people who had chosen to show up. I think we all are. Outside the window, the harbour caught the late afternoon light. The fishing boats rocked at their moorings. Main Street was full, people walking, talking, carrying bags of bread from a bakery that had been closed 2 weeks ago and was now more alive than it had ever been. 4 weeks after the community meeting, Nora Whitfield stood in her bakery at 4:30 in the morning. The ovens were warming. The sourdough starter sat on the counter, freshly fed, beginning its daily rise. The flour bin was full. The morning light had not yet reached the front window, but the bakery was already alive with the small sounds of a business preparing to open. The hum of the cooler, the tick of the oven thermostat, the gentle bubbling of the starter. Everything was the same as it had been for 12 years. And nothing was the same. The front door opened. No bell this time. Grant had learned to catch the door before it chimed, the way someone learns the rhythms of a place they have started to belong to. He carried 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street, set one on the counter in front of her. "You are early," she said. "I have been coming here at 4:30 for 2 weeks. I think that qualifies as on time." She took the coffee. Their fingers brushed over the cup. Neither pulled away. "The renovation crew starts on Diane's old apartment building today," Grant said. He leaned against the counter. No tailored coat, no tie, a work shirt with the sleeves pushed up. He looked like a man who had stopped dressing for the version of himself he thought people wanted and started dressing for the version he actually was. "Tom says the permit's cleared yesterday. What are you turning it into?" "Affordable housing. 6 units. Below market rent for families in the area." He took a sip of coffee. "I wanted to call it the Whitfield Building, but I thought I should ask you first." Nora set down the coffee, looked at him. "The Whitfield Building," she said. "Your mother worked for 22 years to give you a future. The building she lived in should carry her name." Grant's voice was quiet. The commanding tone was gone, had been gone for weeks. What replaced it was something steadier, the voice of a man who had learned that authority and honesty are not the same thing. "If you would rather not, I understand." Nora pressed her thumb against the edge of the gold chain at her neck. Her mother's necklace. The last physical thing Diane had given her, besides the cassette tape and the sourdough starter and the stubbornness that had kept this bakery standing through everything the world had thrown at it. "Call it the Whitfield Building," she said. He nodded, set his coffee down. For a moment, they stood on opposite sides of the counter, the same counter where he had made his first offer and she had told him to leave. "Grant." "Yes?" "I spent 12 years proving I did not need anyone." She said it looking at the counter, not at him. "Turns out that was just a longer way of being afraid." He did not speak. He walked around the counter, stood beside her, close enough that she could smell the coffee and the cold morning air on his shirt, close enough that if she turned, they would be face to face. She turned. "My mother told me something on that tape," she said. "She said, 'Do not let what happened to me be the reason you push people away.' Are you going to listen to her?" "I am trying." Her voice cracked. Barely. The hairline fracture of a woman who had held herself together for 22 years and was learning that letting go was not the same as falling apart. "I am trying, Grant." He reached for her hand, not her shoulder, not the necklace. Her hand. She let him take it. They stood in the bakery at 4:30 in the morning, the ovens warming, the starter rising, the first grey light beginning to touch the front window. "I am not my father," he said. "I know. And you are not your mother. I know that too." She squeezed his hand. "But I am her daughter. And her daughter does not give up on things that matter." He looked at the photograph on the wall behind the register. Diane Whitfield, standing in front of this very building the day Nora signed the lease. Wide smile, crooked shoulder. Beside the photograph, there was now a second frame, Nora had hung it the previous week. Inside, a photograph from the community meeting at the church. 62 people. Maggie in the front row. Pastor Okafor at the podium. Grant standing at the microphone. Nora in the second row, hands in her lap, the gold chain catching the window light. 2 frames on the wall, where there had been one. "My mother would have liked you," Nora said. "I think she would have told me I took too long." "She would have said that too." Nora looked at the 2 frames. Her mother's face, the community's face, the faces of people who had chosen truth over comfort and showing up over staying home. She would have been proud of this block. She would have been proud of you. Nora did not answer right away. She stood in her bakery, holding the hand of the man whose father had destroyed her mother, and she felt something she had not felt in 22 years. Not forgiveness, that would take longer. Not love, that would take longer too. Something simpler, something her mother had described on the tape, in the space between the confession and the forgiveness, in the pause before she said the words that changed everything. Hope. The oven timer beeped. The first batch was ready to go in. Nora let go of Grant's hand, walked to the prep station, pulled the proofing baskets from the shelf, and began loading the loaves. Grant watched her for a moment. Then he picked up a towel and started wiping down the tables. Without being asked, the way he had done every morning for the past 2 weeks, the way he would do tomorrow and the morning after that. The sourdough starter sat on the counter, 30 years old and still rising. The bell chimed. Maggie walked in, reading glasses on her forehead, toolbox in hand. I saw the lights on. She looked at Grant, wiping tables, looked at Nora, loading loaves. This is becoming a habit. "Good morning, Maggie," Grant said. "Do not good morning me. You missed a spot." She pointed at the table by the window. "And Nora, the Whitfield building permit sign went up this morning. I saw it from my store." Nora looked up from the oven. Already. Maggie set the toolbox on the counter. "Your mother's name, right there on Harbor Street." Nora pressed her lips together, did not speak, but her eyes said everything. Maggie looked at the 2 frames on the wall, looked at Nora, looked at Grant. "I have owned my store for 32 years, Maggie said. "I have never seen this block look like this." She picked up her toolbox. "Do not burn the bread." She walked out. The bell chimed behind her. Outside, the harbor was waking up. The fishing boats pulled out through the channel. Main Street was coming alive. Chen's Hardware would open at 8. The church steeple caught the first light of the day. Grant finished the last table, set the towel on the counter, walked to where Nora stood at the oven. "Tomorrow," he asked. "Tomorrow." She handed him an apron. "But next time, bring better coffee." He laughed. Real this time. The first time she had heard him laugh without holding anything back. The sourdough starter bubbled on its shelf, 30 years old and still rising. The best bread is made by hands that are not afraid to ask for help. What did you think of Nora and Grant's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications to keep up with all our stories. And do not miss more heartwarming tales by clicking on the screen now.